You always sing parts.
You just got one off.
Is that it? In the bulletin, the sermon, it says, Towards an Ethic of Medicine, a paper prepared for the clergy group of the Detroit Roundtable of Christians and Jews. The paper is to be found at this point right here. There are a couple of things I would like to say before I do this. One of them is that normally I don't write anything in my book unless it's somewhere down. I never write what's going on that week. I usually remember that. But my memory's gotten faulty, so I keep a date book now for anything beyond 2 weeks. I never used to keep a date book at all. It was a hassle. But I've learned when I started getting a little older that one's mind doesn't function quite as well. So I write things down now. But what really kills me is not the things I plan in a week, but the unplanned things. And this week I had all good intentions to sit down and write the 15 to 20 page paper, which I was going to read at least a portion of to you today, but the Lord conspired elsewhere and my energies did not get to it. Secondly, why am I reading a paper to the Detroit Roundtable of Christians and Jews, and who are they? Many of you know Bob Fraze, who was a congregational minister and for many years was the director of the Roundtable. And Bob called me, I guess on Christmas Eve day, and said, I've got a problem. Can you help us out? And Bob, being a good friend and not realizing what he had in mind, I said, sure, whatever it is, I'll do it. I thought he had something rather simple. He said, good, you saw the announcement where we're having a paper on medical ethics. I said, yes, it looks interesting, and I was planning to be there. He said, good, because we need you to read the paper. I said, oh, well, I'll give about a 15-minute background and lead to discussion. He said, no, Jim, I don't want that. That's what the other fellow was going to do, and fortunately, he's leaving town. I want a formal, full, in-depth paper because we need to get beyond that kind of treatment of this subject. So sometime between now and the next 48 hours, 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, I will write a full, in-depth paper. But it will be easier because of what I'm doing today. While I had intended to have the paper ready for you, I will run through some of the ideas and formulate them perhaps more smoothly so that I can sit down at the typewriter and clack away. I do not apologize for repetition. And there will be some things that you know and have heard on other occasions because I could not do this paper at all without the kind of input and argumentation and debate and discussion and preaching and all that has made this possible. There may be some things which are relatively new, and if they are, then I hope that you will accept them in the way which they are given. As an individual, I am not unduly impressed with the medical profession. I have a tremendous amount of respect for many individuals who work in the medical profession. We have a tendency to think only of doctors when we list the medical profession and fail to recognize that doctors are relatively few in the mass core of individuals who make up what we would call, in a rather loose form, the medical profession. The doctors stand out because they are central in many ways to our understanding, and it is the doctor that we see and get all of our information from. But try to reflect for a moment on the host of other individuals who are involved in any single medical act, let us say, in a hospital. Well, nurses come immediately to mind, but record keepers and head nurses who give the instructions and doctors who write down the instructions and the equipment which is used to work with people and the wide range of auxiliary services in terms of the pharmacy, in terms of the testing labs, in terms of the cleaning and the sterilization, in terms of the preparation of food, in terms of a whole host of activities which carry on within the hospital themselves, and they themselves reflect what's going on the outside, where the medicine comes in from factories where people in the medical profession, scientists and physicists and all kinds of others, are putting together the things which ultimately make their way to my bedside as a patient. When we talk about the ethics of the medical field, we have a tendency to forget the wide range of people who are involved. And while I have respect for, I think it is significant to remember that in the contemporary American society, the medical profession has been able to maintain life expectancy at exactly the same place as the most primitive societies in the world. We have not improved the length of life, contrary to what many have said, for many of the primitive societies have life expectancy every bit as long as our own. What we have been able to do is maintain the battle against our own corruption in society. We have almost been able to hold even with all the stuff we pour into ourselves that cause problems. Now, that's a shocker for some people, I know. But it's true. That is, the pollution, the carcinogenic elements, the wear and tear on the human existence by the upheavals of modern society are now balanced almost by medicine, which in America and most societies is an improvement. Therefore, I approach the medical world with a certain expectancy and hope, but a recognition that we are dealing with people, and any ethical statements have to be made in the light of the fact that many individuals in the medical field have different approaches to the same problem. I'm also going to do something rather different in this particular paper. I'm going to talk about it from a very personal point of view. The reason for this is that clergymen in particular, and there will be probably 60 to 75 rabbis, priests, ministers, nuns, and others at this particular meeting, have a tendency to talk about things like doctors and everybody else does in statistical review. When you operate on my eye, doctor, what are the chances is a legitimate question. Well, you've got a 60-40 chance of seeing. I don't have a 60-40 chance of seeing. I've got 100% or zero. One of the fundamental problems that we have when we're dealing with the ethical and the moral and the spiritual and the involvement is that we sometimes see things in a very cold, statistical way, as important as statistics are, and fail to recognize that for the person who is in the bed or the patient or whatever it is 100% or nothing for them. And when we talk with people, we ought to recognize that statistics are nothing more than a way of putting a barrier between us and saying, you see, you do have a chance. But it does nothing in terms of their own, because the person who is the patient is fully aware. I think in a third way that we would have to understand as part of the background to this paper that I do not consider finance as a legitimate burden. This is a terrible statement for some people. They will not agree with me because we are all upset what's happening to hospital costs, medical costs, and so on. There are a lot of reasons for it which have nothing to do with hospital care. There are as many rip-offs in the hospital field as there are in any other field of endeavor, including the religious field. Ted Garner Armstrong, according to the reports in yesterday's paper, took millions each year from his church donations. Right off the top, skimmed it. So I'm not talking about another profession. Our profession, as we saw in Guyana with Reverend Jim Jones, is full of people who are nothing more than charlatans, who have used and abused the name of religion and the name of God to work their havoc upon those who are open and weak at times of need, and have stepped in and relieved them not of their burden of guilt, but of the burden of their pocketbook. But I still hold that finances ought not to be a thing considered in medical ethics. American society made a very casual decision not too long ago to go with butter and not guns, and then move back to guns and not butter. We have always been able to provide the kind of finances we need in certain crises of our existence as a nation. War has been considered a crisis, and we've poured it out. Money has always been found. Manpower has been found. All of the things that have been necessary have been found. If we are going to understand medicine and ethics and the human existence, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. We have to understand it not in terms of its financial cost, which we must be willing to bear, but in terms of its human cost, which is the most significant factor. Having said these things, I would make as part one of this presentation, which I do basically know what I want to do. Part two you'll probably get next week if you can stand it. That I don't know quite what I'm going to do. That's the toughie part, which I'll explain in a moment. But as part one of this presentation, I would say that health is primarily balance, not perfection. You've heard me talk about this a good deal, but it's something that I think needs to be repeated over and over and over again. We have accepted in somehow or another Western civilization the idea of perfection. None of us are perfect. Some of us are minor imperfections. We wear glasses or contacts. We have our teeth straightened. We go to a dentist. We take a pill for an aspirin. But somewhere along the line there is the idea of the Greek perfection as being the sole understanding of health. Consequently, whether we like to admit it or not, far too often in our theological and medical experience, we try to restore people back to perfection rather than balance. This hits me most hard because in my particular case, there is no restoration back to perfection. The greatest hope is to provide a balance whereby I can exist. Not a restoration whereby I have overcome a particular disease. This is biblical. We have to assert again in our theological Christian tradition that sin and sickness are not related in terms of God's punishment. Oh, I'm well aware of the person who does something and makes themselves sick worrying over it. I'm well aware of the psychosomatic impact of people who are feeling tremendous guilt and try to work it out, and it comes out in boils, acne, nervous tensions. We saw an absolutely stunning drama Friday night, the Caine Mutiny. Those of you who have tickets to Meadowbrook, don't miss it. Absolutely stunning. Did you see it, Lois? Mr. Quinn, Captain Quinn, the actor who played that came in first casual and sort of weak and all that, and then during a very dramatic, almost final scene where the pressures were put on him and he began to break, did the finest job of character acting I think I've ever seen. I wanted to stand and applaud when he left. Feel it? Incredible to watch this captain who was accused of faltering and backing off under pressure, break under pressure and prove the case against him. And what an acting job. And you see the pressure going there. And you see him begin as he's breaking to reach in his pocket and take out the marbles and run them back and forth and get all the nervous tendencies that the interior puts through to the exterior. But in a theological sense, that is a person's feeling of remorse. It is not God who says, I will make you sick to punish you for your sins. And the biblical sense of wholeness and completeness and balance that moves throughout the whole of the biblical world is one that one finds balance and completeness in God, not perfection. Now, there are many ways that we can illustrate this. We are all familiar with them, and we all do it. Each one of us compensates to one degree or another for certain of our inadequacies, emotionally and physically. We wear glasses to compensate. We wear shoes of a particular kind to compensate for difficulties in walking. We develop to a higher extent certain portions of our existence in order to compensate and balance other portions. Those who I understand have gone blind with help and training and love and tenderness can develop a sensitivity to external things that is amazing to those who see. For their hearing and their senses become more aware of things with training and with help. Those who have lost their hearing develop over a period of time with love, with training, with guidance, with support and ability to be aware in ways with their body and their eyes that the rest of us utterly fail to understand. And when we come to the question of ethics, we ought to understand that it is the role of medicine to restore balance, not to restore perfection. Seems to me in the second point that we have failed in our medical ethics to understand that life is a quality, not a quantity, which goes exactly against our preaching, particularly in the Christian church. There is not a Christian church that does not preach that life is quality and not quantity. But we're caught. We are caught between our holy pronouncements and the actual fact. We all recognize that there is an appointed time to die, but as Jean-Paul Sartre says, few of us die at the appointed time. The tragedy of life is that some of us die too soon and some of us die too late. What a tragedy. And the Christian church comes in precisely at the time when people are facing those crises and has little to say about the quality of life because they're caught up at the same way as pastors and teachers and all kinds of lay people with the concern for the moment. Some of you may have been shocked, but at times that I've talked with you, at times of crisis, I hope you've noticed that we've talked about the quality and that in some ways the time has come for certain individuals. It does not take away the pain or the upset or the fear or the anger, but it is a realistic understanding that within life there is a time where you do not want to extend the human existence. And not for us in this church so much, but in other churches there's another interesting lack of balance at this point. Life on earth is preliminary and preparatory for life after death. If that were truly believed by those who hold it forth and speak it, why is there such weeping and wailing at the time of an individual's own taking of life, leaving from this earth and on behalf of others? We need to be whole people. We need to balance our ethical and our theological and our personal experience. We need to see the events of life being part of life, including death, and not as something which is against life and taking away from life. Many of us find that extremely difficult. And it seems to me very quickly in the last place we have to instill in people the understanding of what's happening with them and the idea of supportive, cooperative will. This is a story I don't think I've told from the pulpit. In fact, I've only told it, as I remember, one or two very careful times. It's a very difficult story for me to tell, and yet I think it's important. I am standing here today by an act of will and by an act of love. It's that simple. A lot of good help from some doctors, a lot of good support for some nurses, a lot of things in terms of medicine and all that, but 3 years ago, after all the operations on the eye, when I was taken back in critical condition into Harper Hospital, I made a conscious decision not to die. I almost made it the other way. There's only one reason I made it not to die, and she's sitting right here. If it had not been for Chris, I would have died at that point, willingly, consciously, openly, happily. Because I was drained, I was tired, I was in tremendous pain. They were doing all kinds of things to me. They were tearing out my existence, and I had the choice of living or dying, and I started to die until I saw her sitting out in the highway, in the hallway. They'd kicked her out. I couldn't see, I couldn't do anything, but I could see her there. I described afterwards what she was doing, and it was true. And I said, I will not send her home alone to an empty house knowing I'm not coming back. And at that point, I turned around and came back to life and fought it. And 2 days later, having gone through another upheaval where I should have died, one of the nurses walked in and looked at me and she said, "This is a miracle. When I left on Monday night, you have no hope of living, and I never expected to see you again. And here you're sitting up and eating." And I said, yes, because it was a will to do it. One of the things we do not do with people is share at this time of upheaval their wills to survive. We don't strengthen their ability to fight. We do not make the kind of calls at times of upheaval that strengthen people. And I must confess, although I will not, I might do it even on Tuesday, that the worst people I've ever had call on me when I've been in times of hospital have been, without a doubt, the clergy, who are full of beautiful, banal sayings, but are so terrified of their own existence that I felt like I had to help them. Which ain't bad when you're feeling fairly good, but when you're fighting for your own existence, it's horrible. And those of you who have been in the hospital and who have been through similar circumstances and who have been fighting for your own existence and who have been down know exactly what I mean. You will groan when certain people walk in because you know that every single ounce of your strength has to go to keeping you alive, but you are not going to be able to do that because in order to keep them from breaking down totally in you and falling in bed with you, weeping and wailing, you have to give them something to get them out of there feeling good. Right? And then they leave you, and then you start to fight all over again. Of course, because they come not to give and to support and to be there and to hold and to help, but to let you know that they think it's all right and it's all right that they've come. And part of the medical ethic has to be that we, as people of God, whether we be clergy or lay or whatever we are, begin to share by pouring into people at these moments and not taking back. So that the will and the control, even at the moment of crisis, is in the hands of the individuals, not beyond them. Fully aware, believe you me, I am fully aware that this is not always possible. And it raises the last point that I would do at this introduction. Next week, I'd like to get more specific. A year or two ago, I sat down with my doctor after one of the calls, and instead of the normal conversation that we do, for some reason, if he's got any break at all, sits and we talk for a half hour about all kinds of things. The city, the hospital, the world, the Near East, health, ideas, what he's reading, what I'm reading, who knows. I said to him, Jerry, I want to say something to you very seriously at this point. Chris and I have spent a great deal of time talking about me and my physical existence. And ultimately, some decisions are going to come down to you. I want it to be understood that Chris and I in our Christian, he's Jewish, Chris and I in our Christian understanding of life interpret life as involvement in the living process and control, not as existence. And that if the decision ever has to be made by you, at some point, whether Jim Lyons is kept alive by his machines or by his will and his own internal strength, Chris and I want you to know we do not want the machines. For life is control and involvement. He said, Jim, if the decision is mine and I feel I can restore you to useful involvement in life, I will use a machine. If not, I will not. When the time comes, if the time comes, and I'm hopeful, like all of us, that that won't be necessary, it will not make a decision any easier. It is a very difficult decision. It is one that tears apart an individual, and yet having talked about it beforehand, it gives us strength and the ability to do what has to be done. I think that one of the ethics that we have to have is that life is involvement in life, but life is involvement in God, and there is a point where we trust in God, turn it over to Him. Well, that's the introduction to the paper. Where I'm going to go from there will be partly dependent on any kind of reactions. I may throw it all out and you may tell me it's not worth doing. Where I go from there will be partly dependent upon what you react to. My idea is that we begin to deal with some specifics and approaches, which I hope to take up next week. A brief example, a quick example is, you've got 5 people in one kidney machine. Who do you decide goes on the kidney machine, and who decides it, and how do you decide it? You already know, uniquely, that I'm going to make a suggestion that I've never seen in any of the literature. Some of you are more up on it than I am. You'll have to let me know on this. That one of the people that decide should be the people that are making the choice about, right? But we avoid that for the most part. We've got 5 people that are going on the kidney machine, doctors and nurses and specialists, and all make the decision about which of the 5, but seldom do we sit down with the 5 and say, look, these are the kinds of decisions we're making. Where are you at this point, and how are you reacting to it? As a matter of fact, as we get into it, we're going to find out more and more that one of the real problems is that under the pressure of time, almost no time is spent with patients on the basic questions of their own existence. And one of the ethical principles and medical things that we're going to deal with in terms of involvement of clergy types, lay people, Christian people, Jewish people, and so on, is to restore the ability to talk through problems with people. One of the specifics for next week. Unless this becomes too much like a commercial, tune in next week and hear it. I would just say that if this makes sense to you, I hope on the way out you'll say, keep at it, polish it up, and would like to know what happens. But the fascinating thing, which has to be said over and over and over again, and I can't say it too much, except I will say it in this paper, and I will say it therefore to you, that in addition to what I just told you about Chris and I and our own involvement, I think the support of the people of this church at times of my real being down and struggling for existence has made such a crucial difference that I'm not sure that even with the will we would have been able to pull it off. And therefore, thank you.